what is the board's job? And I think it's important to sort of keep in context what their job is. Their job is not to run the company. Their job is to provide oversight and governance to make sure that we're thinking about risk in the right way and we're allocating our resources to manage it. The reality is, it's not about stopping everything. That's impossible. And so the board is really there to ask questions about what is your strategy? Uh, have you thought about the risks to the company effectively? And then give us an update on sort of your progress towards getting to a place where you think, as a company's leadership team, is appropriate balancing of risk and cost and all of those things.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401x Denied podcast. I'm Joe Carson, the host of the episode, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Really hoping that you'll get a lot of value out of today's session, and it's a really exciting topic for me. It's something that I've been doing quite a bit of research recently on. And I've got an amazing guest to come back on the show, and no other than Art Gilliland, who is the CEO of Delinea. So, Art, you want to give us a kind of audience a little bit of update and background about you and what you do, and then we'll get in deep dive into the topic.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's good to see you again. So, folks, my name is Art Gilliland. I'm the CEO of Delinea, which is a privileged access management technology. I've been in the security industry for about 24 years or so. Tripped over it on accident at a startup back in sort of the very late 90s, early 2000s, and kind of fell in love with it and been here ever since, and worked in big companies and tiny companies, and now here running Delinea.
Fantastic. And one of the important, today's topic is a critical one. I mean, it's something that's been in kind of the foreground and a lot of, big coverage of media. It's a lot of discussions. And it's really about, the importance of cybersecurity at the boardroom level. And
Yeah.
you have a lot of interactions with boardrooms. I'm
Sure.
assuming you do that on a frequent basis.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of get, are you seeing it become more important? Is it becoming more discussed at the boardroom level? And what types of discussions are they having? Can you reveal some of the insights of what does happen when you're
Yeah,
discussing
absolutely, no
cybersecurity?
question. So, I mean, my background here, obviously, I've been a CEO twice, and I've been on a couple of different boards, one public board and one private board. And I will say, over the last probably 5 to 7 years, security has really raised up to a conversation that you have. And I think what I would say is, we talk about, in my current board, we talk about security, not just because we are a security company, but we talk about it as a risk mitigation and risk management. In our audit committee, we talk about it in the general board session, probably every session. Definitely in the audit committee, we talk about it every session, which happens once a quarter. But for the broader board, we probably have a section on security every 6 months or so. Um, and I think the driver of that is just how disruptive it's been. I think ransomware in particular has really raised the profile of security. It's not so much. It's not just about stealing customer data and having that be a problem for your customers. That's super important, but it's also the fact that now they're disrupting operations as well. And so it's the risk to sort of reputational loss, but then it's also like it could stop the company from functioning until you're able to pay. And so that level of disruption has really raised the profile of the discussion around security, and how do you mitigate for it, how do you insure for it, all of those different things.
Absolutely. And we look at some of the incidents over the years, especially those ransomware cases. They can stop a company from running for weeks, even months. And if you take the financial costs of turning your business off for 2 to 3 months, it can have a serious toll on the finances of the business itself. And some even businesses struggle to survive as a result of that.
Yeah,
What
I mean, I
types?
think it's for larger companies, they tend to be a little more resilient, but for a
Mhm,
smaller company, I mean, if you stop operating for a couple weeks or a week
mhm.
because you're held ransom, I mean, it can kill the company. So I think that's definitely something that's on the minds of people that are not only running these companies, but also that are governing them through the
Mhm.
boards.
Absolutely. So when at the boardroom level, what types of strategy discussions happen? What's the strategies that the board is expecting, or what types of things do they expect to measure? What data are they expecting to hear? So kind of, because one of the things I do find in some of the research we've been doing is that there usually is a bit of a misalignment into how we measure cybersecurity in the business and how
Yeah.
we expect to translate that to the board. So what things do you see in that level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is boards are becoming much more educated about how to talk about it. I mean, I think part of what is important in the discussion around this, when you think about as a CISO or as you're sort of
Mhm.
growing up as a CISO, what is the board's job? And I think it's important to sort of keep in context what their job is. Their job is
Mhm.
not to run the company. Their job is to provide oversight and governance to make sure that we're thinking about risk in the right way and we're allocating our resources to manage it. The reality is, it's not about stopping everything. That's impossible. And so the board is really there to ask questions about what is your strategy? Uh, have you thought about the risks to the company effectively? And then give us an update on sort of your progress towards getting to a place where you think, as a company's leadership team, is appropriate balancing of risk and cost and all of those things. Um, and so, obviously, for certain regulated industries, it's a much higher bar, or a much, I guess, much lower risk tolerance. And then other companies have a higher risk tolerance based on what the damage of a security incident could be. I think that's one part of it. And then they also are spending. So that's part of what they're doing is, what's your plan? How are you tracking against your plan? What are the metrics that you think are appropriate? And then there's a discussion around if those are adequate or not. I think the other is, then what are the mitigating things that you're willing to do? And so, a big topic, obviously, now in the boardroom is cyber insurance.
Mhm.
And how do you manage? How do you get it? How much is it going to cost the organization? And then, are there things you can do to lower the cost but increase the protection of a cyber insurance event? So
Mhm.
that way, you sort of think about averaging out the cost of a cyber event through insurance payments and others, and
Yeah.
that way the spikiness of an actual event gets sort of flattened out.
Yeah,
Um,
you
and
kind of
then,
mitigate the
sorry, go ahead.
financial damage, so you do. You can kind of level it off, so it's not such a big extreme at one go. So,
Yeah, it's I think people are assuming that a cyber event is
mm,
going to happen, and so now insurance just helps you sort of flatten out the damage of an individual event, and so your
mhm,
company can tolerate that fluctuation in cost, if
yeah,
that makes sense. So I'll pay
absolutely.
$1,000 a month because I can't tolerate a 50,000 or $60,000 event, and so how do I make sure that I can sort of balance that out? And I think that's why a lot of companies start to look at
Mhm.
cyber insurance today. Um,
Absolutely. I remember years ago, some larger companies, because cyber insurance wasn't something that was so common, and many
no,
large organizations, what they would do is they would take out almost become their own type of insurance company. They would take out cyber captives and take
yeah,
money aside and invest it. So all of a sudden, they can leverage that when they need to. And that money would grow over time when they don't have incidents, but it's almost like they become their own insurance broker in some regards, in that,
yeah.
but
You're talking
they're
about
large enough.
self-insuring against
Yeah.
these kinds of events or something. Yeah, no, I think that's
Yeah.
again, large companies can self-insure in a
Mm,
lot of different ways. I think smaller companies just have a much harder time doing that, being able to afford
absolutely.
to do that.
Absolutely. One of the big concerns I had last year was when we did our own research in cyber insurance as well, and one of the kind of concerns was coming back was that some companies were taking cyber insurance as an alternative to security, and that was a big concern for me because it's the financial safety net part of it. It's not and the research came back and showed that companies who got cyber insurance became victims. Almost 80% of those who surveyed had used their cyber insurance policy, and even half of those who'd used it once had used it multiple times. And that was quite shocking that they were looking at cyber insurance as almost like an alternative to security, but it should never
Yeah.
be that. It should be complementary. So I mean, when you're talking about cyber insurance, what type of approach do you take when you're looking to get insurance from cyber attacks?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so look, I think the reality is, the way that I think about it as a CEO and as a person managing a company, cyber insurance is a way to sort of level out the potential sort of burst of cost. It is not a replacement for the security programs we have. I mean, our business, because we provide security to customers, we have a pretty low tolerance for security risk because of that. And so we invest pretty significantly in making sure that our infrastructure is secure, that the processes we run around our infrastructure is secure, that we reference check our people, and we do all those things because that trust that our customers put in us to protect their most sensitive secrets is super critical to our business. And so insurance for me is really more about sort of helping us deal with any kind of burst of expense if we had to deal with an event. But I definitely don't want to use it.
Yeah,
I think it would.
it's
I think it would.
yeah,
Just having a security event would, of any significance, would damage it. Now, every company is dealing with security incidents all the time.
yeah,
We get attacked a lot, and so it's just how are you managing sort of the blocking and the stopping and the mitigation of those things in real time in your environment. And so um, that's kind of how I see it. It is not a it's a way to help manage the financial impact, not a
alternative.
replacement in my
Yeah.
mind for security infrastructure and security processes.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned earlier during kind of what the boards and kind of was that communication impact and strategies. You mentioned a bit about the mitigation side of things.
Yeah,
How important is it, from a resilience perspective? Because this is really where a lot of misalignment. One of the things I would say is we're no longer protecting computer systems today. We're protecting the business. We're protecting society because
yeah.
they're so aligned. They're so dependent and interlinked. What about the resiliency side of things? What do they expect from a business resiliency? What types of things are they looking for when you're reporting back into the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think and I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to kind of go at it a little bit roundabout, if that's all right,
Okay,
Joe.
not a problem
Uh,
at all.
I think I think one of the things that I would say the board cares a lot about, and that also we talk
Mhm,
about, is how do you practice? What is the
mhm,
practice that you do for it, the inevitability, or for
mhm,
the potential eventual uh, breach that occurs? And I think it's really important to do those sort of tabletop exercises. And it's because the reason I think that is there's a lot of little details you just don't think about in terms of communication, in terms of recovery. And I think part of that resiliency is making sure that you can respond really quickly, and that you have an alternative plan for what you're going to do and how you're going to recover and what those pieces will look like. And I've lived through a couple of different pretty significant breaches in my career, as has some of the leadership team, not only as an advisor and a helper to companies that do that through my job, but also just as a victim, in some of the places I've worked before. Um, and having practice really helps you be resilient, helps you find the pathways, understand what things you need to have prepared as a way to get ready for what could happen to the company. And I think that's a big part of the discussion that we have also at the board level
mhm.
around, what is the plan? How do we think about that plan? Have we practiced the plan? And I think every time you do that, you learn something.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things you're mentioning about, that's for me is the difference between having something like an instant response plan and being instant response ready. They're two very separate things. You can have a plan in
They're
place,
very different.
sitting, and you went through and you've got all the inputs and you've got the contact list, you've got the different priorities, you've got how you're going to basically contain. But there's a big difference between being ready, actually having simulated it, having going through, and what it is. What does it mean to, for example, collect disk images of all the machines? Do you have the disk-based storage? When you're going into creating things like super timelines for forensics, what time zone are you working off? If you're a company that works across multiple time zones, what's your corporate time zone that you want to be actually
Yeah,
going
what do
through
you
to
snap
actually
back to? Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
It's
Um,
it's interesting how a lot of those little tiny
mm,
details, you don't think about it until you actually practice, and you're like,
right.
"Oh yeah, we gotta we gotta decide that." And it is obviously I'm sure there's people watching this podcast go, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I got that." But the reality is you're gonna find something. You maybe have thought of those things, but you'll find something that you just don't realize. Oh, I should have pre-negotiated my PR contract because I needed to find this person, and now because I'm negotiating real time, I'm going to pay a lot more, or I'm not going to get the terms I want. Or I mean, there's just so many little details like that that go through when these things actually happen that you want to get in front of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the ones I participated in, kind of the last ones, it was the things that was missing was about how to feed their incident response team. Where are they going to sleep? Because they're working 24 hours, 7 days a week around the clock. Where are they sleeping? And those were things that was not in the plan. It was like, okay,
Yeah, of course not.
because we practiced it 9 to 5. We didn't practice it,
Well,
Saturday
especially
night.
now when we're in this world where everyone is
Mhm.
virtual, like doing these, like if when you're in war room situation, it's actually better to be all together.
Yep.
It's way faster. Your decisions get done super fast and quick, and you have open lines. And the reality is okay. Now you have an instant response. Okay, you got to fly 16 people in because they're all the ones that are working on this. Like, where are they going to stay? How are they going to do this? Where are we gonna support them? Where are you going to work?
And it is
And so
it does have a big toll in mental health as well. I've seen most of the people I've seen working in incidents and in resiliency, and is that thinking about even therapies and post traumatic stress and stuff, because these are people that's working that not knowing if the company's going to survive, or they're if they're to blame sometimes, maybe they didn't configure some security control correctly or something. So it
It's
is a very
interesting.
stressful
You
environment.
you bring that up. Our chief revenue officer, a guy named Dave Castagnolo, he was the point of contact for the RSA breach, and so he literally was the leader of the team of almost 200 people that they were when they were going through that process. And he said a lot of the initial stage. I mean, people thought the company was going to die,
Hmm.
and so they went through this sort of really emotional process to try to save the company.
Hmm.
And it takes a big mental toll for sure. And he tells a lot of really interesting stories about that and about the sort of results
Hmm.
after, and how people had to deal with that. What is essentially PTSD
Yep.
in after those kinds of breaches.
So if we kind of go back into the boardroom side as well, is
Yep.
who do they go to for advice? What is their kind of go to for because some might sit in multiple organizations boards, some might be designated to one company. Where do they go for advice, or for how to make sure that they understand they're doing the right thing, or the best practices?
Yeah.
What's their advisors and consultants? Where they go for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I am seeing for sure is that a lot of boards are adding somebody to the board with security experience.
Mhm,
And so, for example, on Delinea's board, Myrna Soto
yeah,
is on our board. She is a CISO, been a CISO before, and
mhm,
now she participates in boards. And so she's able to provide what I would call trusted,
mhm,
sort of separate from the company advice on and evaluating our process and our risk
mhm.
management skills and those things. And so I think a lot of boards are adding that skill set to the board. So I think
Okay.
that's one place where they go and what they look for in that process. They definitely are also asking auditors, and so whether it's PwC or EY or KPMG or all of these different sort of audit companies also have sort of security backgrounds, and they're getting advice from them. I see some boards doing that as an alternative. And then the last area that they I think has been pretty important and has been kind of an evolutionary change inside of companies is that sort of independence or separation for the CISO, and so
Mhm.
the CISO being able to report back to the board and have a separate and sort of distinct relationship with board members um, outside of the chain of command.
Yep.
And I think
That was
those
interesting.
those sort of
Yeah.
three those sort of the three areas where I see sort of the board getting its security advice, if you will.
Yeah, that was interesting, as you mentioned that, because one of the kind of things we looked at in the research recently was about where people thought that the CISO should report into, because it's always a big debate.
Hot
It's a
topic
big
up for
it,
sure.
it is a big debate in the industry. We're always going through this. Reporting into the CIO, is that a conflict of interest, or do organizations have a risk officer? Because ultimately, security is all about risk reduction. It's about resiliency. Is that the right place, or is it if the board and the CEO wants to get something as a priority, the things move faster, maybe they're falling a bit behind on their security strategy. Does that mean that the CISO should report directly into the CEO? or also have a seat at the board table. What's your thoughts on where, just interesting to see where you think that this falls into, because
Yeah.
it's always a big discussion.
Yeah, no, I think there's trade-offs everywhere.
Hmm.
To be honest, I think for a company like ours, we're not going to have a chief risk officer.
Hmm.
I think one, we're just not of the scale that can manage it, and that's not a part of the sort of core of our business. We're not a
Hmm.
regulated industry. We don't deal with that level of challenge. And so
Hmm.
I will say that when I talk to customers, and I talk to a lot of customers, the vast majority of customers still have the CISO reporting through the CIO or the CTO.
Hmm.
And I agree with you. It's a little bit of the fox watching the hen house kind of
Yeah.
thing, because there's a lot of security controls in there.
Hmm.
But the reality is so much of our infrastructure and the integration with the security controls is still
Hmm.
IT centric. It's just faster and more
Yeah.
efficient to have those functions be together.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's important for the CEO to recognize the challenge and have a relationship directly with the CISO, and have the CISO be able to report independently of their chain of command. I think that is the most important thing to maintain. Um, but for me, and where our CISO reports in through the CIO, and the CIO then helps to think about infrastructure more broadly. But I also meet with our CISO on a monthly basis to keep track of the pieces, and in fact, probably much more frequently than that, in the time we're in now, just to make sure that we're on track with the projects we've decided, that we're keeping pace with the project design that we came up with, and what improvements we need to make. Because the CISO's job for in our company is not only the IT infrastructure and making sure we're protecting that, our internal guts, but also our product security,
Hmm.
and making sure that we're
The life
tracking to the
cycle. Yeah.
metrics that we've committed to on the product security, that we
Hmm.
have a responsible disclosure policy where when people send us vulnerabilities, we respond appropriately. And so there's a whole bunch of security elements that go into sort of how you secure an enterprise like ours. Um, Now, I have seen them report to a chief risk officer. You typically see that in regulated industries that have a chief risk officer. I have heard of CISOs reporting directly to the CEO. Um, I'm personally not a fan of that, because I think while security is important, I think I add less value to that process as a CEO. I think there's just more effective and more efficient places that it should be. Doesn't mean I don't care about it. Doesn't mean I don't meet on it. But it's not a direct function that I'm going to manage.
Yeah, that's very similar to the actually results that we got back from the research itself. Was it was very
Yeah,
aligned to that, and that most did believe that the CIO was the right place as long as they had the autonomy in order to make sure that they're able to report back what the right things are to do.
sure.
And
I mean, the interesting thing that I've seen, Joe, just
yeah,
as an aside to it, is the evolving skill set of the
mhm.
CISO. And I
That
would
was
say
another
that,
interesting. That was another part of the research that we were actually looking at. What was
yeah,
the skill? What the traditional? So just gonna keep going back on that, is the traditional background of a scissor was very technically. Their background's technical, not business. So I'm just
yeah.
curious to see kind of where you see the skill sets
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I
moving
think
to.
historically, I would say they came from two different places. There were certain
Mhm.
CISOs that grew up through what I would call the IT world, and
Mhm.
obviously, when I started 24
Yeah.
years ago, they were all network admins, because that's really where security was. It was
Yeah.
firewall security, and that was the
Mhm.
only thing that security was. Uh, and so you saw a lot of that skill, and so a lot of the CISOs in the sort of early days were this, network security admin, that
Yeah.
that kind of skill set, or they came up through the technical ranks. The other pathway that I saw come in is the audit and compliance side, and so there were policy CISOs more, and so they had technical CISOs, you had policy CISOs, and that was kind of the beginnings
Mhm.
of those functions. What I started to see probably about 10 years ago is companies rotate in, more business focused CIO kind of types, and
Mhm.
they'd rotate through that. And I think the the reason that that started happening, and I can think of a couple of different specific people, which I won't name on the podcast because I didn't ask their permission. But they were kind of given a tour of duty through the CISO role, primarily because they understood the business processes so well. They understood the infrastructure processes really well. And when you think about the security challenge, it's understanding how to keep operations running, but also understanding where all the potential connections are.
Absolutely.
And so I think you started seeing what I would call more business minded, still IT people, still CIO kinds of folks, but much more business centric folks.
Yeah.
And that allowed the CISO to be more risk centric. Because I
Hmm.
think that in the early days, the CISOs were the no team. Like
Yeah.
you can't do that; it's going to create risk. Can't do that; that's gonna
Yes.
that's going to be a problem.
The
And I think
enforcers. Yeah.
the
The enforcers.
rotation, yeah, the rotation in of
Mhm.
those sort of more business operations minded folks were like, we can do that, but if we do it this way, it'll be safer.
Yes.
And so it's much more about a business enablement function and less than a just sort of stop all the bad stuff from happening kind of world. And that sort of approach towards risk balancing,
Hmm.
I think, is the CISOs that I see mostly today.
Yeah, we're seeing the rise of the BISO, which is the Business Information Security Officer, where it's more of a
Yeah,
person who they might have good technical competency in the background, and they might have come from a compliance and auditing background, but from a technical perspective, maybe they were PCI or maybe they were a NIST or ISO compliant, so they come from that background, but they're really focused around how do they help business outcomes. What is the business resiliency? So it's more of kind of focus around that alignment between where security is no longer just about stopping incidents, is about when incidents happen, is what's the actually domino effect on the business and how they make sure that they can actually keep those dominoes from falling to keep the business running. So the BISO is something that we've seen on the rise, absolutely. And we find that actually the research that we've been conducting shows that actually organizations have a much better cybersecurity strategy when they align better to the business outcomes and business
right.
measurements.
Yeah, I think it's the reality is it's a risk balance, right? And you
Mhm.
need to understand what it is you're trying to enable, what it is the business is trying to accomplish. And I think if you balance that and you sort of augment the security elements around, so you keep those things going, keep that stuff happening at the speed that you need to be able to move in a business context. Those are the best CISOs that I've seen. And I think I do think that having a business context mean a bridge from the technology. I do think because security is still very technical in general,
Yeah.
and I think it's important to either be technical yourself or have a real trusted sort of technical number two.
Mhm.
Because I think you got to weed through a lot of the noise of the security technology companies,
There's a
because
lot of
we come up
noise.
with all these cool whiz bang things, and you got to be able to make that bridge to, okay, that's cool, but do I
Mhm.
care?
Yeah.
And I think that that combination of one, two being technical enough to understand
Mhm.
what they're talking about, and then much more centered on what the business requirement is,
Mhm.
I think is key.
Yeah, being able to translate it effectively is really the key there.
Yeah.
I think so. You mentioned a bit about one thing we're great in the security industry is creating buzzwords. What's the buzzwords in the boardroom at the moment? Are we hearing a lot of?
Oh God, there's so many. Like I think the one that hits the most now is zero trust. I
Mhm.
think everybody's talking about this idea of zero trust, and what is it and how do you get it, and depending on which vendor you're talking to, they're pivoting it towards what they care about. And so I think the board is trying to get their head around like what is that, and does that need to change the way we approach security or not?
Okay.
And so I think that's the big one. Obviously, boards are hearing and reading in the newspaper about AI.
Hmm.
I think that is another big topic, and like how is it going to impact us? How should we think about it? I think companies like ours are all sort of playing with and investigating. Is it valuable? How do we use it?
Hmm.
What are the threats it could create? And so I think obviously because of ChatGPT, that's in the news a lot, and so boards are
Yes.
going to ask about that. But definitely on the security side, zero trust is the buzzword du jour in
Hmm.
my mind. And so that's been a big topic of conversation.
Okay. Yeah. We always hear the buzzword bingo. There's always,
It's always something.
and there's
Every year,
always,
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what RSA. We're obviously going into the RSA conference here in a little bit, and RSA always has a theme, and that'll be the buzzword bingo
yeah.
for this year.
That's one of the things I always enjoy doing is, when I go to the expo halls, I do buzzword bingo. I walk the booths, walk the halls, and I'm always checking to
Yep,
see what's new, what's interesting,
yep.
and
One year everybody did cloud. One year everybody did analytics. I mean, we'll see what this year is.
so absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be AI, most definitely.
I'm pretty sure. I think and this is the challenge. Is the definition of AI is very broad as well. And this is what I get us into is that what in reality what is it? Is it automation? Is there any self intelligence coming out of it? Is there is it just algorithms? That's do you need human intervention at the end as well? Does humans need to understand and make the decision ultimately whether there's a mitigation factor or whether something needs to happen or something kinetic at the end.
Yeah,
But
no,
yeah,
I think, I mean, for us, I think it's, how do you build stuff into your product that help d- humans make decisions faster? And in
absolutely.
some things that are really rote and you can set a policy for, like that's like threshold alerting. People call it
Hmm.
AI, but it's probably just threshold management.
Yeah.
I do think, machine learning and getting the product to sort of understand sort of choices that a human has made in a certain
Hmm.
circumstance can automate response faster, and I think that's valuable to build into products, and so we try to do that. True AI in a security product, I think, is still a fantasy.
Yeah.
I don't. I That's the marketing language that people wrap around it, but it really is
Hmm.
about making decision making faster because it's all about
Completely.
speed and response,
Completely agree.
and being
It's
able to set
yeah.
policies and evolve those policies as you learn more. So
Yeah, I really like. For me, it's the machine learning aspect of things. It's the
yeah,
deep intelligence. It's about getting into natural language understanding. Those are the fundamentals. I think where the
yep,
technologies are really kind of making a difference.
yep,
And they need good algorithms, and it's the algorithms. Sometimes we're referring to as the AI as the algorithm, but it really
yeah.
comes down to how much good data are you putting in to get the right answers to the questions you're
Right.
asking it.
I mean, I'm excited about the potential for it for sure. I mean, I looked. We've been messing around a little bit with Chat GPT and can you write connectors and can you do some code building? And I think what we've sort of come to is those kinds of systems are really good at building the scaffolding or framework of code, but they're not very good at the detail.
Yes.
And so, can we use those things and those tools to help accelerate the beginning parts of it, and then have our folks focus on the fine details? And so, I think there's still going to be a lot of experimentation. There's going to be a lot of work around sort of how you leverage and what you do. But I think it's exciting. I think
Yeah.
there's some real opportunity to accelerate and make technology easier and faster and more sort of human language readable, and so expand the number of people that can actually interact with it. And I think
Contribute,
that
yeah,
that to me
yeah,
is a super valuable thing, if we can leverage it correctly.
absolutely. I thought I've had the same experience as well when it creates a great outline or initial kind of structure that, it needs a lot of personalization put into it. It needs a lot of, modifications to make it kind of, to the point where it becomes really usable. But it's great at creating
Yeah,
that outline, that framework, to start
I
with.
think so.
So
I think it's quite good at that.
fantastic. So, what key takeaways would you have for anyone who's listening in that might be getting into a CISO position, or what types of skill sets or resources you think might be good for them to be able to communicate to the boards better or to prepare? What things do you think that you would recommend those who getting into those positions should start?
So many things. I think Look, I think if you are an aspiring CISO or you're moving into that role, I think the one of the most important things you can do is join the communities, engage with other CISOs, and make sure that you have that friend network that you trust, that you can
Hmm.
share confidential sort of things with in real time. I think that, to me, that building that network of connections, I think, is super critical because you guys need each other, and it's a community of folks that are going to help. So that would be sort of step one. step two is when you're interviewing for or looking for these jobs, I would be testing really closely, like how much access you think you're going to be given. And what that hierarchy is going to feel like when you're there. It's less important who you were put to, it's more important what that dynamic is going to be when you're in
Hmm.
there. And so, access to the CEO, access to the board, I think is super critical to be able to do your job effectively and hold the organization accountable. And so, I think making sure you feel comfortable with that. So
Hmm.
those would be two big things off the top of my head. I think the last thing that I would just offer up is your world is super technical and detailed and down into the regulations, and you're mapping to controls and things like that. Your board doesn't think like that. They want red, yellow, green lights. They want to know sort of progress towards success. And so being able to, in an effective way, sort of capture the all of that detail that you have and provide it to the board so they can focus in the right areas is super critical. So whether that is, taking classes on writing or communication skills, it's a super important part of your job because you have about 15 minutes to help communicate effectively what you need in those boardrooms. There are some boards that will spend more time. If you have an hour on the board agenda, that's too much because people will stop paying attention. They just will.
Yeah, yeah, because
Uh,
it's not their it's
they're
not
not
what they
their
do every day.
expertise, and
Yeah,
when you have an hour, you're going to fill it with stuff that candidly they're already thinking
yeah,
about board number two or lunch or who
yeah.
knows whatever. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way to these boards that are super effective and intelligent people. It's just the 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 tolerance for that much into the guts of a company isn't what their job is. Their job is governance, and so helping them govern through: are you on track? Are you thinking about the right areas of risk? Putting it in big animal pictures is a super important part of your job. And so and then managing all that detail underneath it with your team.
Yeah.
So those are the big things I would say: is understand your network and build that. Make sure you understand the dynamics of your access, because that's going to make it so you can be successful or not in the company. Be able to communicate super clean and clear, and then build a team that can help you manage the details. Those would be my
I think
pieces of
that's
advice.
I think that's fantastic. It's it's actually so. I think that's probably so valuable. A lot of people will get, who's listening in, really great insights, and really help them understand about where
Awesome.
things. If they are good in certain areas, it at least gives them areas that they can enhance on, or and
Yeah,
absolutely for
I
me,
mean, everybody's going to know where their skills are.
yeah,
You got to build around your skills, and if you're not that writer person, make sure you have one.
yeah,
Find somebody who's
find
good
somebody who can help you.
at that.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So this has been awesome. This has been really, it's like almost like a little bit of a sneak peek into what happens in the cybersecurity at the board level,
Yeah,
and some of the priorities and some of the areas of focus. And so, thank you, Art. It's been fantastic, and
that
for
was
the
my
audience,
pleasure, Joe.
this is really insightful. And I think that for those who are aspiring CISOs, this is a much watch episode now for sure.
Great. Well,
Um,
thank you very much. I appreciate being invited to the show. I like doing it.
Absolutely, we should have you more often. I think it's been a while since we
Happy
had you
to.
on, so
Yeah, happy to. Happy to.
but I'll take advantage of that. So for everyone, great having Art on, and definitely, tune in every 2 weeks for the 401 Access Tonight podcast. Really bringing you, amazing, talented guests and insights and resources to really help you, map out your path to a great future, and hopefully, a safer society. And let's make sure we reduce and to make the world a safer place. So thank you. Take care, stay safe, and all the best.
Awesome. Bye.